Don't tell me that you don't understand. Don't tell me that you know. Don't tell me that this is just a test, that I'm really blessed, that I'm chosen for them from within me. Don't tell me how my grief will pass, that I shall soon. Don't tell me how to suffer, and don't tell me how to cry. My life is filled with selfishness. Right now, my pain is all I can see. Accept me in my downs. I need someone to share. Just hold my hand and let me cry. And do tell me that you care. Good evening. I'm Nazzie Taylor, Chief of Criminal Trials of the Alabama Attorney General's Office, and I want to thank you to remember victims of crime. We honor you tonight, and we have united to observe National Crime Victims Week. Traditionally, the Alabama Attorney General's Office partners with Vocal, Victims of Crime and Leniency, to host a candlelight vigil honoring Alabamians and their families who have been hurt or killed because of senseless crime. Due to COVID-19, we cannot hope are not forgotten. I thank General Marshall for having the vision to do this and for the compassion that he shows for crime victims each and every day. Many of you have already paid tribute to your loved ones on the website, alabamacandlelightVigil.com, and those of you who wish to light a virtual candle for someone you love, there is still time to do so. Tonight, we stand in solidarity, several agencies, to tell you that we hear your cries, and not only will we hold your hand, but we are willing to speak for you, to cry for you, to stand with you, and we will fight for you. We commit ourselves as vessels, inspire hope. At this time, Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall will honor our fallen officers.
Thank you, Azzy, and good evening. In events like this across the country, when many reflect upon the victims of crime, usually they think only of civilians. But those whose duty it is to protect the public, especially law enforcement, take an oath to protect the public. And in doing so, they place their lives in danger. Recently, too often in Alabama, that's been the case. Since January 2019, 7 officers in Alabama have been killed by hostile gunfire, the most in our state's history in the last 30 years. And as each has lost their lives in the line of duty, let us also remember that these men are more than simply public servants who have answered a call to protect and to serve. So many who still mourn the loss of life and their loved ones daily. Tonight, we remember those fallen law enforcement heroes who were the victims of violent crime. Birmingham Police Sergeant Watasha Carter, end of watch, January 13, 2019. Mobile Police Officer Sean Tudor, end of watch, January 20, 2019. Auburn Police Officer William Beekner, end of watch, May 19, 2019. Tuscaloosa Police Officer Dornell Cousette, end of watch, September 16, 2019. Lowndes County Sheriff Big John Williams, end of watch, November 23, 2019. Huntsville Police Stack Agent Billy Clardy, end of watch, December 6, 2019. And Kimberly Police Officer Nick O'Rear, end of watch, February 4, 2020. Tonight, we honor the service and the lives of these fine Alabamians, and we remain humbled by their sacrifice.
Speaking on behalf of the victims of sexual assault is the Honorable Jill Lee, the District Attorney for Shelby County.
Good evening. Excuse me. I'm honored to be a part of this important event, and I thank you, General Marshall, for inviting me. I've been a prosecutor for over 25 years, and I've served many victims, and I've come to know many of them very well, and many of those have been victims of sexual assault, and they are all a part of who I am today, both personally and as a prosecutor. You see, long before I was a prosecutor, actually before I even thought about being a lawyer, a young woman from a nearby community was abducted at gunpoint, held for days, and raped repeatedly. It was a high-profile case, and as a very young woman, it scared me. So I followed the case closely. That victim survived. Close by, in a young girl's safe place, her home, unknown to anyone other than she and the perpetrator, that young girl was being sexually assaulted by someone she knew and trusted. She also survived. Truth is that neither case is out of the ordinary. Hundreds, even thousands of women and men and children are sexually assaulted each and every day in this country. The number of sexual assaults in civilized society is astounding. It is the unspeakable crime. Each of the victims of which I speak not only survived, but now champion the rights and project hope for victims each day. When I was a law clerk and then a young lawyer, one mentored me and taught me the importance of fighting for victims' rights and fighting relentlessly. The other taught me about pushing forward and not letting the past control your future. Though he changed her life, she refused to allow him to steal the joy of her future. This evening, we honor each of you who survived the unspeakable, and we both honor and we grieve those who did not survive. It is our hope that you find joy in life and hope for the future. If you are listening this evening and have been victimized, you are a survivor. There is hope.
Next, representing Alabama victims of domestic violence, is Ms. Jawanda Brooks, the Executive Director of Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
Good evening. Thank you, General Marshall, for having us. For many years, victims of domestic violence suffered in silence because this crime was viewed as a family issue that should stay within the walls of the home. We ask, how can one seek justice when society views this crime as none of your business crime? I'm here to tell each of you that it is our business. It is our business to ensure that the victims of domestic violence and their children are protected. It is our business to ensure that all offenders of domestic violence are held accountable, no matter what their professional or socioeconomic status is. It is our business to ensure that all victims of domestic violence have a right to live a healthy life and afforded the same rights as all other victims of crime. It is through advocacy, prevention, and intervention that victims of domestic violence and their families survive. Our agency stands with victims of domestic violence to ensure that they understand their rights and know that there is help. We want victims and their families to know that you are not alone. We want victims and their families to know that we stand with you each day. We want victims and their families to know that we will be here when you are ready to seek justice, understand your rights, and know that it is safe to take the pathway to hope. On any given day, our agency provides services to over 700 victims of domestic violence. Over the last 5 years, our agency has worked tirelessly on legislation to improve laws to ensure offenders of domestic violence are held accountable. We have advocated for additional funds to develop trauma-informed programs so that we can truly support victims that enter our programs. We have provided assistance to thousands of families that have escaped abusive situations by relocating to safe housing. This Candlelight Vigil was created to raise awareness of victims' rights and services, while highlighting programs celebrating progress achieved and honoring victims like Adele Rollins, Miles Dean Sprague, Crystal Rose Renee Hancock, Lori Ridings, Candace Bowles, Shay Pugh, Ashley Cotney, Carla Mack, Tracy Tony, Renee Moore, Rakeisha Cadell, Marquis Farrell, Lisa Warren, Stacy Hogan, Anna Grogan, and Megan Louise Montgomery. Remember their names, remember and act.
Lynn Byas is the State Executive Director of the Alabama Network of Children Advocacy Centers. She will be speaking on behalf of victims of child abuse.
Good evening, and thank you, General Marshall, for allowing us to attend. I now invite you to join me in remembering victims of child abuse, victims of neglect, and victims of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. Tonight, we honor their stories, their lives, and their triumphs. In America alone, 5 to 7 children die every day from abuse and neglect. Almost 3.5 million cases are reported every year. That's every 10 seconds. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 3 boys will be sexually abused by the age of 18. While situations and experiences may be vastly different, the long-term effects of child abuse are consistent. It affects how children feel, how they learn, and how they act. I would like to read an excerpt from a letter written by a child abuse survivor. You brought me into this world and taught me so many things. You taught me how to hate my body at a young age, how to cover up my bruises, and how to stay silent. You taught me truths about the world, like how to be a real woman at age 13 and that big girls don't cry. You taught me how to fear the dark and hate bedtime. You taught me how to lead a double life and to trust no one. As a child, I felt guilty, ashamed, and dirty. I blamed myself and thought that it was my fault. But now I know the truth. I take comfort in knowing it wasn't my fault. I didn't ask for or deserve it. Despite all the painful memories, I still struggle with wanting to see you. I still want to be your girl. Happy birthday, Daddy. I miss the person I needed you to be. Unfortunately, 90% of sexual child abuse victims know their perpetrator. Last year alone, child advocacy centers in Alabama performed 7,300 forensic interviews. And let us not forget those that are not represented and didn't have someone to intervene on their behalf. Without intervention, children are at a higher risk for school failure, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, domestic violence, and criminal activity. Child advocacy centers around the state exist to intervene and help families find justice, hope, and healing. CACs are a safe place and a wonderful environment where children can go and share their story and begin the healing process. So what can we do? What can you do? Listening and learning is not enough. We must take action. We need to pay attention, observe, and ask questions. Don't be afraid to speak up for a child, even if it's not your own. You may be the only voice they have. Victims deserve to be believed, supported, and respected. Children and survivors deserve nothing less. None of us can solve this crisis alone, but by partnering together and using every tool and resource available, we can make a real difference in our home and in our communities. And I promise you that the Child Advocacy Centers in Alabama will continue to work with their MDT partners to battle abuse and restore lives. Thank you for your participation.
Next, you will hear from Ms. Pamela Morton. She is the State Victims Coordinator of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. She will be speaking on behalf of the victims of drunk driving.
Good evening. I too thank you, General, for allowing me to be a part of this tribute. I want to thank every victim and survivor for your courage to simply be here. I know this can be a sad, difficult night. My hope is that this night may offer you some comfort. Tonight, I join you as you join me in remembering our loved ones. At MAD, we all say, come to us as you are. You are not alone. You always have a place here at MAD. Tonight, even though we support each other virtually, we are not alone. Victims and survivors, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, we are all dedicated to a future of no more victims. Tonight, we want to encourage you. We will share our love as well as our grief. This is your safe place. Tonight, I am here to help you honor the life of your loved one. I also honor the nearly 1 million victims of drunk and drug driving that MAD has served over the last 40 years. Your strength inspires me. Tonight, no matter the stage of your grief, we can mourn together. Let us also care for one another together. Let us hope together. Let us heal together. Let us love together. By doing this virtually, I hope it would somehow release you just a bit so that your current difficult situation we find ourselves in, isolating ourselves to save lives, will become bearable. May we even find joy in the memories of our loved ones as we have lost. At MAD, we know the stories of our victims and volunteers are our most powerful educational tool we have to stop this violent, 100% preventable crime of drunk driving. That a future of no more victim lies with the support of our police who are on the front lines every single day, and with tougher drunk driving laws, and with the kind of technology that will make it impossible for an impaired driver to start a car. And by every one of us taking a personal responsibility to never, ever get behind the wheel of a car impaired, we can eliminate this crime. Tonight, we honor victims and survivors of all crime. Love brings us to do things we never thought possible. We light that candle. We say that precious name. May the light of your candle shine in the darkest places and brighten your journey. In the end, 3 things abide: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And each of us is here tonight because we loved.
Next, you will hear from Ms. Jeanette Grantham, who's the Executive Director of Victims of Crime and Leniency. She will be speaking on behalf of all Alabama crime victims.
Good evening. My name is Jeanette Grantham, and I am Director of Victims of Crime and Leniency. That's VOCAL. VOCAL works with all crime victims, especially at pardon and parole hearings, but our major emphasis and most of our services are for homicide survivors, for family members of a homicide. Miriam Sheehan and I, along with the VOCAL staff and VOCAL chapter members all across the state, we are heartbroken that we were not able to have our vigils this week as we normally do. I am very thankful that Attorney General Steve Marshall stepped forward and allowed us to have this virtual vigil tonight. I have talked with crime victims across the state this week who normally would be coming to our vigil, and they have all expressed their thanks for this happening. Crime Victims' Rights Week is a week is a time for all crime victims, but especially for those of homicide. My brother is Coffee County Sheriff Neil Grantham was assassinated one morning when he arrived at the county jail, and that's when I first heard the word homicide survivors. Miriam Sheehan, who is the founder of Vocal, her lovely daughter, Quinette Sheehan, was kidnapped, raped, and murdered in Birmingham. She had just graduated from Birmingham Southern. Miriam and a small band of 9 volunteers got together, and they formed this organization called Vocal. And because their mission was to seek justice for crime victims, to ensure that there was crime victims' rights laws. At that time, there was not any. And they wanted to provide hope to other crime victims out there. Miriam and these 9 other volunteers, they were homicide survivors. Their cases had already gone through the judicial system, and they realized there was no justice out there. We do not call it the criminal justice system because there is no justice for victims. But Miriam and this group formed Vocal, and today, as a result of their hard work and the hard work of others across our state, we have 27 victims' rights laws. Today, the victim's voice is heard in the courtrooms across our state. The victim's voice is heard at pardon and parole hearings. Today, victims have rights, and it is important that we ensure that they know their rights. Many of the warriors, there are other warriors out there who fight every day for crime victims, and sometimes we tend to forget them, but this week is also a week when we recognize those, and a lot of those warriors are here tonight. But there's also warriors across the state, in every judicial circuit in the state. There is district attorneys and their staff who fight for justice in the courtrooms every day for crime victims. They have victims advocates in their offices now who will reach out to crime victims. There's others, there are victims organizations that are here tonight and other victims organizations across the state. Many of the homicide survivors band together, and they are also victims advocates. They attend court with crime victims. They stand by them through all the process, the judicial process. On April the 19th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan proclaimed the first Crime Victims' Rights Week in our nation. President Reagan realized at that time that there was no justice, there was no rights for victims, and that was the beginning of the victims' rights movement in our nation. As I've said before, the victims' rights movement started here in Alabama with Miriam Sheehan and a small group of warriors. They fought for justice for all of us, and our mission at Vocal is the same today as it was back in 1982. Seek justice for crime victims, inspire crime victims' rights, and inspire hope for a better tomorrow. Vocal has proven that one person may not be able to do a lot, but if you band together, 9, 10 people can create crime victims' rights laws for all of our crime victims across the state. Not only am I heartbroken tonight for the loss of our vigils this week, but also as we go through this health crisis and we are homebound, there is a group of individuals, organizations out there who are determined to use this health crisis that we are enduring as a time to release inmates from our prisons and from our jails. These individuals have no compassion for crime victims because each of those inmates that are in our prisons and in our jails, they committed a crime. And there is a victim out there because every crime has a victim. And they have no regard and no compassion for our victims. We had, just this past week, I learned that there is a movement here in Montgomery County for defendants to be named, to no longer be called defendants because that's cruel and inhumane. And so there is a move for us to defendants to be justice-involved persons. And you know, as long as we allow things like this to happen, as long as we allow inmates, convicted inmates, to be released from our prison because they might be in danger of a coronavirus, just like the rest of us, as long as we allow names like defendants to be removed and be called justice-involved persons, we are handling these criminals with a kid glove. And that is one of the things that Vocal has fought for so long, is that when we recognize that victims' rights are being overlooked, that victims are in danger of losing our rights, we have to speak out. We don't make a lot of friends that way, but we are here to ensure that victims' rights are not overlooked. So if you are a homicide victim out there and you need someone to talk to, we have a counselor 24/7 every week. We provide crime scene cleanups so that parents would not have to go back in their home and clean up for where their child was murdered. There are so many services that we provide to all victims. So if you are a victim out there tonight and you need our services, please contact us. Thank you.
Speaking on behalf of Alabama prosecutors is Mr. Barry D. Matson. He is the Executive Director of the Office of Prosecution Services.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor, and thank you, Attorney General Steve Marshall, for hosting this event and making sure that it occurred this year, keeping us connected to the past and making sure that we go in the future and continue to recognize victims of crime. I'm honored to be here to speak tonight. I began my career as a prosecutor nearly 30 years ago, and I'm reminded of a young man named David Marler. I was introduced to prosecution by handling the murder case where he was a victim. And all he had done to deserve being stabbed many, many times was to give a person a home. An act of kindness was rewarded with murder. It was 30 years ago. I still remember that young man. I prosecuted countless murder cases, crimes against women and children, property crimes, theft, fraud, DUI homicide, DUI murder, drug drivers over the years. And every one of those victims are a part of me. They shape who I am, and they define me. I think of their names and their faces. There are certain times of year when the weather changes, or when I see the leaves begin to change, I think of a case. I think of being at a crime scene. Certain things remind me, certain tunes on the radio remind me of cases and remind me of these victims. They permeate who I am. And I'm grateful for that, because they live on in all of us, and they live on in the communities that they were taken from. But not just homicide victims, but like I said, victims of assault, victims of sexual assault, domestic violence. Those crimes etch themselves in people's lives, in families, in communities, forever. They change the way people live. They change our economy. Security business, alarm systems, security companies, they're a billion-dollar business for a reason. And what I fear is that we have let crime become normalized. When I started 30 years ago, homicide was the front page, and it was the absorbing news of the day. Now, it may not get covered. Domestic violence, we talked about it. We warned our families about it, and we were frightened of it. And I fear crime has become normalized, and that's something that's just not acceptable. We turn to thoughts rather than the victim of crime or what it does to society and communities and families, and we see murder has become entertainment. We watch television programs, news programs, documentaries about crimes of violence that are designed to entertain us. Podcast about a vicious homicide that some family survived that. Someone was taken brutally, and it's made into a movie of the week. You can go through the checkout line at the grocery store and see a People magazine that highlights smiling faces of murder victims as if it's something you can pick up. People magazine. You have to ask yourself how we got there. It wasn't overnight. It happened slow and deliberately. And it's time for us to move in the other direction. It's time for us to say enough is enough. We sit around a lot of times, we wonder, why doesn't somebody do something? Why don't they stop it? Well, you're they. We're they. And it's up to us to say enough is enough. I'm here tonight to represent the prosecutors in Alabama, and I'm so proud to do that. I love my job. As Executive Director of the Office of Prosecution Services and the Alabama District Attorneys Association, I work with the finest women and men across the state of Alabama that their oath and their calling is to seek justice. They don't go to work every day seeking vengeance or retribution. They seek justice. And that's a calling, and it's very difficult. Because like I said when I began, the victims that I've worked with in my career, hundreds of them, are with me today. And the prosecutors across Alabama feel the same way. And it's very easy to see the worst in society and believe that's all there is. But a good friend of mine once told me that it's easy to slay a dragon, but what's hard is to wake up every morning afterwards and still love the world. And that's what prosecutors in Alabama do. They're engaged in the communities. They're not just prosecuting the criminals, and they're just not fighting bad guys every day, but they also coach Little League. They teach Sunday school. They're part of the community. Just like the people you've heard here tonight that advocate for children advocacy and families of homicide victims, of domestic violence, and coalition against rape. The folks you've heard speak tonight don't spend 24 hours a day. They do that, and they're dedicated, but they also help in the community. They're part of the communities. They love their communities, because you can't be an advocate for the weakest without loving everybody in the community. I know that's kind of hard to wrap your brain around. I mean, a prosecutor loves everybody, but we do. Because we love the community, because we care about the people in our communities, we fight for them. We fight for them against the people that would take property, that would take their lives, and would take their innocence. And we're guided by Micah 6:8 that said, what does God require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Remember, to act justly. That's what the Lord requires of us. But He requires us to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. And that's what we're called on to do, and that's what the prosecutors do every day of the year. It's difficult. In Alabama, we have over 85,000 felonies a year. You heard earlier there are over 7,000 children interviewed about sexual and physical abuse a year. And we know that number is probably double when you look at the ones that we don't know about, maybe tripled. There are over 260,000 misdemeanors a year, many of those serious domestic violence cases. And like I said, over 84,000 felonies a year. Alabama only has about 315 or 320 full and part-time prosecutors to handle those cases. Yet there's about 17,000 lawyers in Alabama and about 15,000 police officers. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for us, and we meet that challenge gladly because we walk humbly with our God. Thank you again, Attorney General Marshall, for the opportunity to speak here tonight. And I hope that every victim knows out there that are within the hearing of our voices that we care about you, that tonight we remember you, and we celebrate you. But there's also good news. Alabama has advocates, prosecutors, law enforcement, and victim services officers out there that are dedicated to you and to helping you not only through the criminal justice process, but afterwards. God bless.
Now, we light our candles, honoring all victims of crime. We vow to seek justice, to ensure victims' rights, and to inspire hope.
As he said, we light those candles on behalf of those individuals that were named tonight and those whose names were unspoken. We light those candles on behalf of those of you that had a virtual candle in honor of your loved one, and for those that would continue to be able to hold on to the hope that you have from a loved one that you have lost. So if we could have a brief moment of silence as we honor all victims throughout this state. Thank you. And thank you to our speakers for what you brought to tonight's vigil. This year's national theme of seeking justice, ensuring victims' rights, and inspiring hope really reflects a vision for this country and how it is that we would respond to victims' issues. A vision, if placed into action, creates a criminal justice system with many positive outcomes. One, it obtains healing as we seek justice for communities, when those who commit crimes against others are held accountable for their actions. One that supports the efforts of law enforcement, prosecutors, and advocacy groups like that are here tonight, where we ensure victims' rights so that they have voices in courtrooms and that we can make sure that their stories are not forgotten. And it creates a vision that serves as a catalyst to inspire hope through a shared commitment to stand with victims and families no matter the challenges that we face as a society. President Ronald Reagan once said that for too long, the victims of crime have been the forgotten persons of the criminal justice system. May we now, as a nation and as a state, be mindful of that important reminder. As National Crime Victims' Rights Week comes to a close, it was important for many of us tonight to have the opportunity to be able to gather here physically as well as with you online, to share, even in a time of pandemic, the importance of serving victims. And for those of you that have suffered loss, for you to have a way to see that you are not alone and that your loved one is not forgotten. Speaking on behalf of Alabama's law enforcement and all those who are represented here this evening, to the victims, let me tell you that we understand that we serve you best when we listen to your needs, your concerns, and your issues. And our pledge tonight is collectively that we respond to you with professionalism, with hope, and with compassion. Because when we do so, we are successful together. And in that regard, justice is obtained, rights are protected, and hope is inspired for all those in this state who need it and deserve it. Thank you for joining us tonight. For those of you that still want to light that virtual candle, we will continue to have the website up. We are grateful for the enormous response that we have seen as a result of tonight's vigil. I'm grateful again for all those who spoke so passionately tonight about their service of victims and for their advocates in courtrooms throughout this state. We stand united with victims to serve. God bless you all, and God bless your families.